The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls, a perfect backdrop for the fairy tale evening Amara had been dreaming of since she first fell in love with Daniel. Every detail was flawless, the roses arranged in ivory vases, the orchestra playing softly in the background, the diamond ring resting like a promise on her hand. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of forever. Amara moved through the crowd, smiling politely at guests, her heart racing with excitement. She had built her life around this man, believing in the future they had planned together. She trusted him, trusted the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. Or so she thought. As she slipped into a quiet corridor to gather herself, voices drifted toward her. She froze. It was Daniel. And with him, a voice she recognized instantly. Clara, his glamorous ex, the one woman Amara had always felt insecure about. "I never stopped loving you," Clara whispered, her tone dripping with seduction. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Daniel's reply was low, conflicted, but undeniable. "You make me feel alive, Clara. I don't know what I was thinking, marrying her." The words struck like knives. Amara pressed against the cold wall, her chest tightening, the edges of her perfect evening collapsing into shadows. The man she thought would protect her heart was tearing it apart with cruel honesty. Moments later, Daniel emerged back into the ballroom, Clara trailing behind him with a triumphant smile. The engagement announcement began, and Amara stood beside him, her body rigid, her face masked in practiced poise. She prayed he would hold her hand, reassure her, tell her the whispers she overheard were lies. Instead, Daniel cleared his throat, raised his glass, and said the words that shattered her world. "I cannot go through with this engagement. My heart belongs to someone else." Gasps echoed through the hall. Amara's vision blurred as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Pity mingled with scandal. Clara slid into the spotlight, clutching Daniel's arm as though she had won a prize. Amara stood frozen, her soul hollowing out in front of strangers. Humiliation washed over her like fire, but beneath the devastation, a seed of resolve took root. As she walked out of that glittering hall, her heart in shards, she whispered to herself, "Never again. I will never be this weak again." The night should have ended with whispered congratulations and champagne toasts. Instead, the ballroom simmered with scandal, whispers rippling like wildfire. Amara stood at the edge of the room, her heart still reeling from Daniel's betrayal, when the sharp click of heels cut through the murmurs. Daniel's mother approached. Elegant, regal, and icy, Mrs. Steele carried herself like a queen about to pass judgment. The crowd parted instinctively, eager to witness what would happen next. "Amara," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I warned my son. I told him you weren't worthy of this family, this name. And now you've proven me right." Amara's throat tightened, but she refused to bow her head. "I did nothing wrong. Your son made his choice." The words had barely left her lips when it happened. A sharp crack split the silence as Mrs. Steele's palm met Amara's cheek. The sting was instant, burning, but it was the humiliation that cut deeper. Dozens of guests gasped, some turning away, others staring with morbid curiosity. "You will not speak back to me," Mrs. Steele hissed, her eyes blazing. "You should have known your place. You were never good enough for him, or us." Amara's hand trembled as she touched her cheek, her face hot from both the strike and the shame. Tears threatened to fall, but she forced them back. She would not give them that satisfaction. Daniel stood nearby, silent, his arm still linked with Clara's. He didn't defend her. He didn't even look at her. That silence was louder than the slap itself. Straightening her spine, Amara let the pain crystallize into something sharper, resolve. She turned slowly, scanning the room filled with judgmental stares, then lifted her chin. Without a word, she walked out of the ballroom, her heels clicking against marble like a drumbeat of defiance. Outside, the cool night air hit her skin, mingling with the sting of her cheek. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself against the chaos in her chest. "This isn't the end," she whispered into the darkness, her voice steady despite the quiver in her heart. The slap was not the end. It was my beginning. Amara left her city the very next week, carrying nothing but a suitcase, her degree, and the fragments of a broken heart. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. There was no farewell, no looking back. The woman who had been humiliated in front of hundreds no longer existed. She would bury her pain in distance and silence. Life abroad was unforgiving. The city she moved to pulsed with opportunity, but for someone like her, foreign, broke and wounded, it was merciless. By day, she juggled part-time jobs, waiting tables, cleaning offices, tutoring children. By night, she buried herself in books and research papers, chasing knowledge like oxygen. Her dream of becoming a scientist wasn't just ambition. It was survival. The path was brutal. Professors dismissed her ideas with smirks. Male colleagues whispered that she should leave science to the men. Rent was often late. Some nights she went to bed hungry. Yet every obstacle only hardened her resolve. Each insult became fuel, each doubt a spark that kept her pushing forward. Alone in her small rented room, she would stare at her reflection in the cracked mirror and whisper, "They thought I was weak. They thought I would break. I will prove them all wrong." Slowly, her brilliance began to shine through. Her professors couldn't ignore her anymore. She stayed hours in the lab experimenting, failing, trying again. Where others gave up, Amara pressed on. One evening, exhausted from a double shift, she scribbled notes for a concept that came to her like lightning, a vision of technology that could change lives. She didn't know it yet, but those late-night sketches were the seeds of an empire. Amara wasn't just rebuilding herself. She was laying the foundation of a legacy. The lab became Amara's second home. While others treated research as a requirement, she treated it like a battlefield where her dignity was at stake. Every experiment was a step away from the humiliation she once endured, every formula a weapon sharpening her future. One sleepless night, while studying cellular regeneration, she stumbled upon an anomaly in her results. What looked like failure at first slowly revealed itself as something extraordinary. A method to accelerate tissue healing using a new biotechnological compound. Amara's heart pounded. She stayed in the lab for days, testing, refining, and documenting. Her discovery wasn't just promising, it had the power to revolutionize medicine. Word spread quickly. Professors who once dismissed her now leaned in with curiosity. A few seasoned scientists offered mentorship, recognizing her unshakable persistence and raw brilliance. For the first time, Amara wasn't just the outsider in the lab. She was its brightest star. Soon, her work drew the attention of investors. At first, she was cautious, remembering how the world once belittled her. But as proposals came in, funding for research, support for publishing, and opportunities for global conferences, she realized this was the turning point she had fought for. Amara defended her thesis with confidence that silenced every skeptic. The same professors who had once told her to leave science to men now applauded as she earned her PhD. She walked across the stage with her cap and gown, tears burning in her eyes, not from pain but from vindication. Articles called her a rising star in biotechnology, while investors labeled her the future of science. But for Amara, it wasn't about the titles or the praise. It was about proving that the girl who had been slapped and abandoned was gone forever. As she looked into the mirror that night, her reflection was no longer cracked and weary. It was radiant, unbreakable. The world had once called me worthless. Soon it would know my name. Amara's discovery was more than a scientific achievement. It was the foundation of an empire. With the help of her mentors and a team of loyal researchers, she patented her biotechnology breakthrough. Investors who once overlooked her now scrambled to be part of her vision. Boardrooms that had once sneered at her background now listened in silence as she spoke with authority. She named her company Novalife Technologies, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. From its very first year, the company disrupted the medical industry. Hospitals worldwide clamored for her innovations. Clinical trials confirmed what Amara had known all along. Her formula could save millions of lives. And with each headline, her reputation grew. Young black woman scientist revolutionizes medicine. The billionaire genius who defied the odds. Overnight, Amara went from a woman who once scraped coins for rent to one of the youngest billionaire scientists in history. Yet, unlike many who craved wealth for power, she saw money only as a tool to build more labs, fund more research, and inspire women who had been told they didn't belong in science. While Amara's empire soared, Daniel's world began to crack. His company, once celebrated for flashy deals and shallow prestige, faced mounting debt. Market shifts and poor decisions exposed his weaknesses. The same investors who mocked Amara for her impractical dreams now whispered about Daniel's decline. His pride, the thing that had led him to betray her, was being chipped away by reality. Irony didn't escape Amara. From across the ocean, she read articles about Daniel's faltering empire and Clara's constant need for the spotlight. But she didn't gloat. Instead, she smiled softly. Life had a way of writing its own revenge, and her success was the most poetic answer of all. Amara's story became a global phenomenon. She was invited to conferences, honored with awards, and featured on magazine covers. Reporters didn't just call her a billionaire, they called her a symbol. A woman who had risen from betrayal and humiliation to reshape the world. And yet, fate was not finished. Because as her empire climbed higher, Daniel's collapse dragged him closer to her orbit once more. The stage was set for their worlds to collide again. The invitation arrived in a sleek white envelope sealed with gold, an honor few received. Amara had been chosen as the keynote speaker for the Global Science and Business Summit, held in the very city she once fled in humiliation. She held the letter for a long moment, her heart steady. This was not just an event. It was destiny calling her home. When her private jet touched down, the airport was already buzzing with paparazzi. Flashes went off as she stepped out in a tailored suit, her posture tall, her presence magnetic. "Is that really her?" someone whispered. "That's Amara, the billionaire scientist." Cameras zoomed in, capturing every angle of the woman who had once been dismissed as nothing. At the summit, the grandeur was undeniable. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and business tycoons mingled with world leaders. When Amara entered the hall, conversations hushed. Heads turned. Old acquaintances who had mocked her ambition years ago now strained to catch her eye. Some whispered in awe, others in envy. She no longer needed their validation. Her very presence silenced them. On stage, she spoke with a voice that carried both grace and fire. She didn't just talk about biotechnology, she talked about resilience, about breaking barriers, about the power of belief. The audience hung on every word. When she ended with, "I stand before you today as proof that what is broken can be rebuilt stronger than before," the hall erupted in thunderous applause. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw him. Daniel. He sat stiffly among the crowd, his jaw clenched. His eyes locked on her as if seeing a ghost. Only it wasn't a ghost. It was the woman he once discarded, now transformed into everything he could never be. Clara wasn't at his side. His tailored suit looked sharp, but his confidence was gone. He looked small in the face of her triumph. For a moment their eyes met. Daniel's were wide with disbelief. Amara's calm and unshaken. She offered no smile, no acknowledgement. She didn't need to. Her success was the answer to every insult, every betrayal. The girl he once humiliated no longer existed. Before him stood the billionaire scientist the world now celebrated. The gala was the pinnacle of the summit, an evening of champagne, chandeliers, and whispered alliances. Amara entered in a flowing gown of midnight silk, a diamond necklace glimmering against her skin. Cameras followed her every step. No longer the forgotten girl from a broken engagement, she was the center of the room, the woman everyone wanted to meet. Daniel spotted her almost immediately. His once confident stride carried a hint of desperation as he crossed the floor. "Amara," he said, his voice low, as if speaking her name would somehow bridge the years of betrayal. She turned slowly, her gaze cool. "Daniel." For a moment, the past flickered between them. Laughter, promises, the sting of humiliation. He smiled faintly, reaching for charm that no longer worked. You've changed, but I always knew you were special. Maybe we. Amara cut him off with a sharp glance. You didn't know anything. If you had, you wouldn't have thrown me aside. Her words were calm, but each syllable sliced deeper than anger ever could. Before Daniel could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. His mother. Still regal, still sharp-eyed. She stepped forward with the same arrogance she had wielded years ago. So it's true, she sneered. You've dressed yourself up in wealth, but underneath you're still the same girl who was never good enough for my son. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Cameras subtly tilted toward them, guests pretending not to eavesdrop. But Amara didn't flinch. She stood taller, her voice steady and clear. You're right about one thing, she said. I'm not the same girl. The one you slapped was broken. The woman standing here rebuilt herself into someone you can never touch. Daniel's mother's eyes narrowed, her pride bruised. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, caught between shame and awe. Amara leaned closer, her words deliberate, each one a dagger. Power doesn't come from a family name. It comes from surviving what you tried to destroy. The silence that followed was electric. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Some stared in shock, others in admiration. For the first time, it wasn't Amara who walked away diminished. It was them. The news broke like thunder across the business world. Novalife Technologies acquires Steel Enterprises. Headlines dominated every platform. From rejected fiancé to billionaire CEO. The woman who rose from betrayal to buy out her ex. Overnight, Amara wasn't just a scientist. She was a symbol of poetic justice. The deal had been swift, ruthless, and brilliant. Daniel's company had been crumbling for months, its debts mounting, its credibility evaporating. Investors, hungry for stability, begged Amara to take over. She didn't have to chase revenge. The opportunity fell neatly into her hands. And she took it not out of spite but out of strategy. When the press conference was announced, the room filled with flashing lights and reporters elbowing for a better shot. Amara stood at the podium, her presence commanding. Behind her, the Novalife banner gleamed in blue and silver. To some, she began, her voice even but strong, this is just a merger. But to me, it's proof that resilience can outlast betrayal. Steel Enterprises will now be restructured under Novalife, with new leadership and a new vision for the future. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras zoomed in on her serene smile, the very picture of triumph. Meanwhile, Daniel watched from the sidelines, his once proud company name now signed away. His jaw was tight, his eyes hollow. Beside him, Clara shifted uncomfortably, realizing the spotlight she once craved now exposed her to humiliation. Once celebrated as Daniel's glamorous prize, she now looked like a relic of a failed empire. Social media exploded with memes, hashtags and commentary. Hashtag Amara wins trended worldwide. One viral post read, "He left her for his ex. Now she owns his company. That's not revenge. That's evolution." But Amara carried herself with grace. She didn't gloat, didn't mock. When asked about Daniel during interviews, she simply replied, "The past is the past. I'm focused on building the future." Her restraint only amplified her power. For Daniel, the humiliation was unbearable. For Clara, the shame was inescapable. For Amara, however, the victory was sweet, not because she destroyed them, but because she proved she could rise without their approval. And this time, the world applauded her rise. The boardroom was silent when Daniel walked in. Gone was the man who once strutted with arrogance and entitlement. His shoulders sagged. His eyes carried years of regret, and his voice trembled when he finally spoke. "Amara, I was wrong," he admitted, the words almost choking him. "I should never have betrayed you. I should never have listened to Clara or—" He swallowed hard, his pride breaking piece by piece. "Or allowed my mother to humiliate you." I ruined the best thing I ever had. For a moment Amara said nothing. The sight of him kneeling, figuratively and almost literally, was surreal. Years ago, she had begged for scraps of his love. Now he was the one begging for mercy. Then the door opened, and his mother entered. The woman who had once slapped her in front of hundreds of guests now looked older, frilier, stripped of her former superiority. "Amara," she said quietly, her tone void of venom. "I misjudged you. I was blinded by pride. Please, whatever you decide, don't destroy my son completely. He's lost enough already." The room grew heavy with silence. Everyone seemed to wait for Amara's judgment. Would she crush them as they had once crushed her? The temptation was sharp, the memory of betrayal still vivid. She had every right to take everything from him, to leave him with nothing. But Amara was no longer the broken woman they once dismissed. She was a billionaire scientist, a leader, a force of change. Revenge had already been served the moment she rose above them. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I don't forgive because you deserve it," she said softly but firmly. "I forgive because I deserve peace. Forgiveness is not for them, it's for me." Her words carried the finality of a verdict. Daniel bowed his head, shame consuming him. His mother closed her eyes, humbled. Amara turned and walked away, not in anger but in power. Because true victory wasn't in their ruin, it was in her freedom. Amara had learned the sweetest revenge wasn't destruction, it was creation. Rather than wasting her empire's power on crushing enemies, she poured her energy into building a future that would outlive every wound she had endured. Through Novalife Foundation, she launched global programs that funded scholarships for young women in STEM, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. She built research labs in developing countries, places where brilliant minds had once been overlooked, just as she had been. Each investment was a message. No girl will ever be told she doesn't belong in science again. The world watched with admiration. Investors respected her business genius, but the public revered her compassion. Articles called her the scientist who turned betrayal into a movement. Documentaries captured her story as one of resilience, power, and unshakable determination. Amara didn't just rise, she lifted others with her. And in doing so, she rewrote her legacy, no longer defined by Daniel, his mother, or Clara. They were footnotes now. She was the headline. Months later, she stood on stage at an international award ceremony, the hall filled with world leaders, innovators, and visionaries. Her name was called as one of the most powerful scientists of the century. As she walked to the podium, the audience rose to their feet, giving her a standing ovation that thundered through the room. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the women who cheered louder than anyone, knowing they saw in her their own possibilities. Her eyes glistened not with pain but with pride. "Years ago," she began, "I was told I wasn't good enough. I was humiliated, slapped, and betrayed. But instead of breaking, I chose to rise. And tonight, I stand not for revenge, but for every woman who dares to dream beyond the limits others set for her." Applause roared, cameras flashed, and history was written. As the lights bathed her in gold, Amara whispered the words that had carried her through the darkest nights. "They once broke me, but I returned unbreakable." And the world knew her fire would burn for generations.